Okay, picking up right where we left off. Before we go any further, let's save our work. So just go to File, Save as, Save Scene As, and then just name the scene whatever you want. That way, in case if the computer crashes or whatever, your work won't be lost. For the demo, it's really not necessary because we only have this one scene. But if you're doing a complete project, you're going to have who knows how many dozens of scenes depending on how complex of a game it is. So, okay. Now, right now, what we have is we have a picture in a picture, so to speak. And that is we can see a slightly zoomed in version of the trees. What we want to now be able to do is control that. We want to be able to zoom in and zoom out. Now, since I don't know if everyone has a gamepad or a game controller, I'll do this on the keyboard, but either at the end of this video or I'll do a separate addendum, a separate video where I redo the functionality using a gamepad. But for now, we'll use a keyboard because everyone has a keyboard. So there's two ways to do this. You can actually move the position of the camera. So right now we're facing the Z-axis. So if you were to move along the Z-axis, if you look where it says camera preview in the lower right corner there, you can see you're zooming in because you're actually moving the camera. Okay. The second thing that you can do is you can move the field of view. So if you reduce the field of view, you can see that you are indeed zooming in. Now, some have said that changing field of view results in distortions. I haven't seen any. So if it does result in distortion, then just go ahead and change the Z position. This is more complex though. And the reason for it is because if you want to move an object, first you have to add a rigid body, which is no big deal, but that requires greater explanation. And then it also requires more tracking because you'd have to determine what is the maximum amount you can zoom out, what's the maximum that you can zoom in, because you're not tracking the position with velocity. You're just saying move at a certain rate. Well, you could be anywhere. But if you're using field of view, you already know what the starting field of view is. You know what the maximum field of the minimum field of view that you want to be. So it's much easier to track. So for simplicity's sake, we'll use the field of view, but I just want to let you know you can actually go ahead and move the camera. And one of the reasons why it's not a big deal to move the camera is because you still have your first-person camera. So it's not like it's breaking where your character is standing. But like I said, it still creates a complexity of having to track where that second camera is in proportion or in relationship to the primary camera. So again, simplicity's sake, we're just going to change field of view. So right-click, create. C#. We'll call this cam zoom. We'll click on our camera object. We'll put on cam zoom. We'll open that up. Okay, so first we need key codes. That way we can bind this to the keyboard. So public key code. And we'll just call this zoom in. Oops. Zoom in. Public key code. Zoom out. We'll put those next to each other. So you save that, and then you'll see what happens to the object. Because you declare them as key codes, it says, okay, what's the key you want to use? Well, we'll use W and S, typical keyboard control. So W is forward. If we're using a gamepad, we'd probably use the right analog stick and use forward and back on the analog stick. Okay, so now we're looking for... We're now looking for keys to be pressed. Now we have to say what happens when the keys are pressed. So if input, because you're looking for input, dot. Now there's three type of get key commands. Get key down, get key up. Get key is a true statement for every single frame that a key is being pressed. Get key down is true for precisely one frame, the first frame that the key is pressed down. Get key up is true for one frame, the first frame that the key is released. So we really want a rapid fire scenario. As long as that key is pressed, we want this to be true and we want something to happen. That way the person doesn't have to rapidly or repeatedly, I should say, hit W or S. So input.getKey and then zoom in. So if the zoom in key is pressed, we want something to happen. We want get component. What component? The camera component. All right, well, what attribute of the camera? Field of view. Now, what we need to do is we want this to change, okay? So we really need a variable that gets reduced. So let's put another one up here. So public, and we'll make it a float because it's going to be a decimal. And we'll call this zoom level. And we'll say that it starts at 60. So that's what we said over here. So this is going to be set to zoom level. And I'm going to make a change to this in a minute. I just want to explain why we needed that, and then we're going to rearrange this a little bit. Okay, so if zoom in is being pressed, then we want zoom level to be reduced. So minus equals, so that is take the current value of zoom level and minus something from it. Let's minus like 0.25. And actually, I believe that has to have an F next to it since it is a decimal. So now we really don't want this here. We're going to move it. We really want it outside of the if statement. So it's really only the variable that we're changing. Okay, and let's run it. What's nice about having a variable is when you've let go, since it's not true, it doesn't keep changing the variable. So since this isn't true, this doesn't get changed. Whereas if you're using velocity, like I mentioned with a rigid body, you'd have to put in an else statement that says, okay, stop moving, because the object's actually in motion. So this actually gives that additional simplicity. Okay, so we got it to zoom in. Now we want it to zoom out. So we're going to copy this. I'm going to paste this. In this case, it's going to be plus 20.25. And it's going to be the zoom out key. So zoom in, let go, zoom out. Okay, so far so good. Now we just have to put in the limits. So what we need to do is we need to look for more conditions. So, and we already have the ability to do that. This is tracking what the current field of view is. So, we want to zoom in as long as, so, and zoom level All right, so this is getting decreased. So let's say if it's greater than 6, you can keep zooming. And for here, we're saying if zoom level is less than 60. So let's save this. So zoom in, I'm holding, and it stopped on its own. Now I'm going to press S, zooming out, and it stopped on its own. So there you go. You now have a zoom. I'll probably do a separate video for the game controller, because if you're not familiar with that, that takes a little bit more explanation and a little bit more configuration. Okay, so that should do it for this video.